Assalamu alaikum students, welcome back to your literature class, and I hope all of you remember that this is your American literature class. The course code of course is ENG552, and we are approaching the end of the semester now with essays and short stories, poems over and done with. Now we are doing the contemporary American play The Glass Menagerie by Tennessee Williams. The play is a memory play basically, so it's not the kind of play where you have to stick very closely to reality. It's in fact unrealistic because it is basically one character's memory that we see here and how that particular character perceives other characters and events that take place in the drama. This character is Tom Wingfield. The other characters in the play are Tom's mother, Amanda Wingfield, his sister, Laura Wingfield, and a character who comes towards the end of the play and who is just called the gentleman caller. And of course, during the course of the play, we find out that his name is James D. O'Connor. There is another character who doesn't physically appear in the play, and that is Mr. Wingfield. He's present in the sense that there's this huge portrait of Mr. Wingfield that has been that is on display on one of the walls, and it's a portrait that the audience can see all the time. So whenever references are made to Mr. Wingfield, either there is a physical pointer or there is in speech a pointer to the portrait. What we have done up to now is discussed how Amanda Wingfield is concerned about her daughter because she's not getting married. She doesn't want to take up a job, and Amanda Wingfield cannot see a third option for Laura. All that she can see is marriage and professional life. Professional life, Laura Wingfield cannot have since she dropped out of a business school, a school which trained young ladies to become secretaries. So since she dropped out of that school in the early days of the program, Amanda Wingfield understands that the professional life is not for Laura Wingfield. So then the second option and the only option that remains is to get married. Marriage is all very well for young women who go out and who meet people, who lead an active social life. But for a person like Laura Wingfield, who doesn't go out, who doesn't meet people, who doesn't feel comfortable talking to strangers, it's a very sort of a tricky option in the sense that she never goes out to meet anyone. So how is she going to meet the person she wants to marry? In the absence of that happening, Amanda Wingfield decides that there must be young men coming to the house so that they see Laura and Laura sees them, and they gauge whether the other person would be a good partner for life. So this kind of a situation or this kind of an individual is known as the gentleman caller, and this phrase, this term, Amanda Wingfield has borrowed from her own youth. So 30, 40 years into the past, this phrase was being used. Now that would make it the second half of the 19th century. This play was written in the 20th century, and so Amanda Wingfield is based in the 20th century. But she is, when she refers to her adolescence and her youth, then she is straight away talking about a time that is 30 years in the past. So somewhere in the first 2 decades of the 20th century. Now, the point at which we left off is where Amanda Wingfield has just been told by Tom that he has invited a colleague of his over for dinner. Now, Amanda at once jumps to the conclusion that this is going to be the person that Laura will marry. And Tom says that you need to slow down, because the person whom I have called does not know that Laura even exists. And he's just been invited for dinner. But Amanda sees this as a very big step that has been taken in the right direction, and she starts making plans on what she's going to cook, on the new cutlery and crockery that she's going to take out, on how she's going to change the bed sheets. She even goes to changing the curtains. So she takes this very seriously. She's very excited, even though Tom keeps on telling her that Mr. O'Connor does not know that the Wingfield family has ulterior motives. So he is totally unaware of what they have planned, and he proceeds accordingly. So the point at which I left off in the last class was where Tom Wingfield and his mother are having an argument, and what the argument is about you will see in a little bit. Amanda Wingfield tries to subdue her son, tries to bring him under her own influence, and one way of doing that is criticizing his habits and making sure that he forgets all habits, and that he is cast in the mold that she would like him to be. Now, the point at which we left off, where Tom is trying to convince his mother that Mr. O'Connor is just a visitor. He is not a gentleman caller, and therefore he should not be referred to as someone who may or may not be desirous of the life of another human being. So while they're having this conversation, Amanda brings up a hairbrush and she starts brushing Tom's hair down, and he says, "What are you doing?" And she says, "I'm brushing that cowlick down." What is this young man's position at the warehouse? So, you know, Tom has this shock of hair that sort of sticks out in the front, and what Amanda is trying to do is brush his hair down so that his hair looks tidy. She's a great one for tidying things up. So she says that all I'm doing is trying to brush that cowlick down. Of course, Tom is more or less silent during this time, but he's getting angry all the time. So when she asks him what this man does at the warehouse, Tom says, "Well, he's a shipping clerk like me. You know, we are colleagues, and that's what he does in the warehouse." And Amanda says, "It sounds to me like a fairly responsible job, that of a shipping clerk. That's the most that she can do." But she qualifies it by saying that the sort of job you would be in if you just had more get-up. In other words, if you had more courage, if you were more ambitious, you would also be a shipping clerk, and Mr. O'Connor would not be the only one. And then she asks the question that is considered very rude in Western society, but which here it's considered normal. It's something that people ask you anyway. So the question that she puts to him then is, what is his salary? Do you have any idea? And Tom says, "I not only have an idea, I know the exact amount that he gets, and that is $85 a month." So that's not a very impressive sum in Mrs. Wingfield's opinion, but Tom points out that it is $20 more than what he gets. He's getting $65 a month, and O'Connor is getting $85 a month. So according to Tom, if he can support a family on $65 a month, why can O'Connor not support a family on $85 a month? Not that he has plans to, because as he points out to his mother, he's not married, he's not a family man. So Amanda picks up this this statement and she turns it around and she says, well, he might be married, mightn't he? If he's not married already, that doesn't mean that he's never going to marry. So Tom says plans and provisions, and plans and provisions was the legend on the screen when we first started to see Tom and Amanda discussing Laura and the prospect of a proposal for her. So when Tom makes the sarcastic remark that Amanda is making plans and provisions, Amanda turns around and she says, you are the only young man that I know of who ignores the fact that the future becomes the present, and I want you to pay particular attention to this. The future becomes the present the past, and the past turns into an everlasting regret if you don't plan for it. So Amanda has planned for it. Amanda is planning. She does not want to be caught with the short end of the stick in her hand, and so she says, I'm going to plan and I'm going to make sure that tomorrow when he comes for dinner, he is going to be thoroughly impressed, not only by Laura but by all of us. And Tom says, you know, I'll see what can be done about it. And he will not give details in spite of the fact that Amanda keeps on asking him, and she even goes to the extent of asking his full name. And when Tom says that it is James Delaney O'Connor, Amanda at once starts thinking that he's Irish on both sides, that is his mother's as well as his father's side, and yet he doesn't drink. Now that's a very strange idea. The Irish are renowned for their whiskey drinking, and so when Tom says that Jim does not drink, Mrs. Wingfield finds that hard to believe, and she says, are you sure that he doesn't drink? And Tom says, well, you know, I can call him up right now. I can make a phone call and ask him if he drinks or not. But to this, Amanda responds very sensibly, and she delivers a fairly longish speech in which she says the only way to find out about those things is to make discreet inquiries at the proper moment. The proper moment takes her back to her adolescence and her youth in Blue Mountain, and she says that there, if it was suspected that a young man drank, the family would make very discreet inquiries. They would ask the church minister, they would ask those in the vicinity, but they would never ever talk to the young man and ask him about his smoking problem. They would never do that. So this was supposed to be one aspect or one idea from which you could gauge what a person's character was like. So when she says that, you know, the past, if you make a tragic mistake, it becomes a part of your life, Tom says, how then did you happen to make a tragic mistake? And of course he is referring to the fact that she married Mr. Wingfield, but a few years later Mr. Wingfield ran away. He escaped from this prison this family that he called a prison, and he just disappeared. He could not be traced. So Tom says, how did you happen to make a mistake? And Amanda says that your father had this innocent look on his face, and even when he was guiltiest, that look would win him fans. So what she is talking about is that the appearance of a man is important. She doesn't want a very short man for her daughter. She doesn't want a drunkard for her daughter. She wants only the kind of person who would be desired by the other sex, but who would belong exclusively for that time to that particular individual. Now, Mrs. Amanda Wingfield is rather confused. It's the first time that anyone is coming to their house, and so she's excited, she's tense, she's irritated with Tom. Everything is happening at the same time. So she gets mixed up in the questions that she has asked and the questions that she wants to ask. And when she can think of nothing else, she says, he's not too handsome, is he? Because a too handsome man can cause a lot of problem for his wife, since many women are attracted to him. So Tom says he's not too handsome. In fact, he's got a lot of freckles on his face, and you don't need to worry about him being too handsome. And then when he says this, she comes up with another question, and she says, he's not right down homely though, is he? And Tom says, not right down homely, just medium homely. So he's not very good looking, but he's not bad looking either. And Amanda is trying to pacify herself, and she's trying to control her excitement at the thought of this individual coming to their house and the possibility of Laura getting married and going away. So she brings in various arguments in favor of looks, she brings in arguments in favor of character, and she can't seem to decide which of the two is more important. The one thing that she wishes for is that he should be ambitious. And Tom says that I think he is ambitious because he goes in for self-improvement. And Amanda wants to know how he does that, and Tom says he goes to night school. And now this is something that makes Amanda sit up a bit, and she says, you know, a person who is worried about his education is a man worth knowing. So when she finds out that he goes to night school, she wants to know what he does there. And Tom says that he's doing radio engineering and public speaking. Now these two are very different disciplines, but he needs public speaking because whatever he's going to do, he has to sell something to the general public. Radio engineering, of course, is something that really pays off. You don't need to worry about anything. So when Amanda finds out that these are his qualifications and this is the kind of person he is, she says, then he has visions of being advanced in the world. So he's planning for a time when he might be advanced, he might be right at the top with the directors in this company. And here Tom utters a little warning, and he says, you know, Mr. O'Connor does not know why we have invited him. This is something that they keep hidden, and they keep it so well hidden that Jim O'Connor does not realize the trap that he is falling into. So this conversation between Amanda and her son continues, and Tom tries to send out sort of warning signals to his mother not to talk too much about him to Jim O'Connor. And he also says that you mustn't expect too much of Laura, because Laura does not have the habit of mixing with people. She is not only disabled in the sense that one leg is shorter than the other, but she is also rather simple. You know, she plays these old phonograph records all the time. She keeps on winding the Victrola, and then the Victrola starts to spout music. And the idea that you get is that she sort of compensates for her disability. And when Tom says that, you know, we have a crippled little sister, Amanda does not allow him to say that, and he says that I have not allowed anyone to refer to your sister as being a cripple. She has a slight disability, a slight adjustment problem, but she does not have she does not have what it takes to in order to understand this situation, we need to understand Amanda's point of view, and Amanda's point of view is to get Laura married off as soon as it is humanly possible. So this discussion between Amanda and Tom regarding Laura being not all there and being all there continues, and it seems as if there's going to be no resolution to this, because Amanda insists that Laura is quite normal, and Tom says that you have to admit that she's not. Not only is she a cripple, but she lives in a world of her own, in which she plays old phonograph records, and she has this bowl of glass animals, and she washes them and she polishes them and cleans them all the time. She doesn't seem to have anything else to do the whole day. So for him, that is a very strong point, and that is the glass menagerie that Williams is talking about. But of course, this argument cannot be resolved, and Tom leaves the apartment, or starts to leave the apartment, because he sees that he's not getting anywhere. His mother will not listen to him, will not try to understand his point of view, and therefore he decides that he will leave. And when he's about to leave, Mrs. Wingfield wants to know where he's going. So he says, I'm going to the movies. And she says, you can't go to the movies every single night. There has to be something else. You are not telling me. You are keeping a secret from me. And therefore, Tom just leaves the apartment, and he leaves his mother talking to herself. And when Tom has left the apartment, Mrs. Wingfield calls out to Laura, and she says, forget about the dishes, come and sit here. It's cooler here, it's very hot and humid in the kitchen. And Laura is sort of surprised at the question that Mrs. Wingfield throws at her, and this question is, come here and make a wish on the moon. Now this is a reference to the traditional concept that if there was a full moon, you would turn around on your left shoulder and try to see the moon from this side, and then if you made a wish, that wish would definitely come true. So a bit of the fairy stories mixed in with this play. And when and you have to see Laura's point of view, because when Mrs. Wingfield says, come and make a wish, Laura says, moon, moon, and Amanda says, it's a little silver slipper of a moon. Look over your left shoulder, Laura, and make a wish. So it's the kind of fairy story that Williams brings into this drama and sort of interweaves it. Of course, Laura has absolutely no idea of how to make a wish, because it's the first time that she has been asked by her mother, and she is so so indifferent to what is going on around her that she says, what shall I wish for? So she doesn't have any choice of her own. She just doesn't have a mind to think about choice. And Tom says, I know what you have wished for. And Amanda says, maybe no, I have wished for happiness, for good fortune. And this is where you have the curtain for scene 5. Now when scene 6 opens, the legend or the image is high school hero. And you see Tom as narrator, and he is going to relate what he remembers and what he knows of Jim O'Connor's life. He says, the following evening I brought Jim home to dinner. I had known Jim slightly in high school, and the reason why he knew Jim very slightly in high school was that Jim was the high school hero. He was tall, and he was in the basketball team, and he was in everything that received limelight. Tom was one of the very ordinary students, nothing spectacular about him. He was not in any of the teams, but he did know Jim O'Connor. Jim O'Connor was also president of the senior class in the Glee Club, so he had a good voice, he was good in sports. Obviously he would have been a great favorite with all the other students, particularly the female students. So his life was was full of running and catching. Running to catch a class, running to take a class, running for a game. Tom says that he was always running or bounding. He seemed at the point of defeating the law of gravity because he was always running so fast. And you know, basketball, you need to be able to run very fast from point A to point B. So this is the history that he describes, or that he relates about Jim O'Connor. And then he says that 6 years after Jim left high school, he was holding a job that wasn't much better than mine. So what Tom is trying to justify is his own position. If he, not being a superstar in school, could land this job, and Jim O'Connor being the superstar, being the basketball team captain, getting so many other honors, if he also lands in the same company in more or less the same job, then who is the better off? Obviously Tom, because he has just started, because he didn't have the qualification, he wasn't very popular in high school, etc., etc. And the one thing that Tom does remember is that Jim called him Shakespeare because he was always reading and always writing, and he tried to hide what he was writing because he didn't want to show it to the general public. Gradually his attitude affected the others, their hostility wore off, and they also began to smile at me. So in the beginning, the other workers at the warehouse had sort of looked down upon Tom Wingfield, who is called Mr. Shakespeare by Jim O'Connor, because Tom is always writing poems and he doesn't know where to write them, so he will write them in shoe boxes, etc., etc. So they had been together at high school, they land in the same company with the difference of a few years. James O'Connor is making slightly more than what Tom Wingfield is making. As he says to his mother, O'Connor earns $85 a month, whereas I earn only $65 a month, and on that I have to make sure that my whole family can be sustained. So he says that, we need to be careful because Laura is not all there, and Laura cannot be depended on to sustain a long conversation. So when there is light on stage, there's the legend, the accent of a coming foot. It's Friday evening, and you see that towards 5 o'clock, Mrs. Wingfield has worked like a dog, and she has made the place irreproachable, made the place very impressive in the short span of 24 hours. So when 5 o'clock comes around, you see that Amanda has everything in place. She has new curtains up, she has this new sofa which looks very nice. There was a broken light fixture, and she has covered that with a lantern, a paper lantern. There is the floor lamp which casts a beautiful glow. So she has worked, as she says, like a Turk. As we would say these days, she has worked like a dog. So she gets all that done, and when we see her, it is in company with Laura. She is trying to make sure that Laura is very nicely dressed. Remember, it's that Rishta people coming up, the way Amanda Wingfield and her son have planned. And so Laura has to look her best. She gets her a new dress, although they can't afford all that. She still thinks that Laura needs a new dress more than Mrs. Wingfield herself. Laura's hair is very nicely styled, etc., etc. So she looks very good. But she is trembling in her excitement, and that makes Amanda nervous. It makes her angry, and she says, "Why are you trembling?" And Laura says, "Mother, you've made me so nervous." And she says, "There's nothing to get nervous about, you just relax." But Laura says, "You've made such a big fuss over the whole thing that I am getting very tense and I'm very nervous." And to this, Amanda's response is, "I don't understand you, Laura. You couldn't be satisfied with just sitting home, and yet whenever I try to arrange something for you, you seem to resist it." And of course, she is hitting back at Laura because Laura chose to leave the business school and go for walks rather than go back and learn secretarial typing and shorthand, etc., etc. So where previously you had an argument between Tom Wingfield and Amanda Wingfield, now the argument is between Laura Wingfield and Amanda Wingfield. So that this gives you the impression that they're fighting on all fronts. So she takes a long time in getting dressed, and then once Laura is dressed, Amanda produces 2 powder puffs, and she tries to make Laura appear more beautiful than Laura is actually. And this upsets Laura, and she says, "What are you doing?" And Amanda says, "Oh, this is something that everyone does." And this is a point at which there's a difference of opinion. But Amanda, being Amanda Wingfield, gets her own way. She does not allow Laura to dress the way she wants to. And she makes her conscious of her lack of womanly beauty, and of course this further upsets Laura, and so she sort of dresses her up and prepares her very nicely, and she says, "Now you look at yourself in the glass. This is the prettiest you will ever be. I've got to fix myself now. And so then Amanda rushes out and she says that I have to get dressed also. So now that you're dressed, you can sit here in the living room and entertain the guests and entertain the gentlemen callers as and when they appear. And meanwhile, I'll go and change also. So when Laura stands in front of the mirror and looks at herself, she is impressed with her own appearance, and she realizes that a lot of this has to do with Amanda Wingfield's hard work. The legend on the screen this time is, "This is my sister, celebrate her with strings." And of course there's music, because this is where Laura is supposed to make her grand entry. She doesn't actually walk onto the stage, but the fact that she moves from one room to another is sufficient to give that the title of my sister, celebrating her with strings. Amanda, of course, is seen in a very positive spirit, and she says, you know, I'm going to surprise you. And Laura says, how are you going to surprise me? And when Amanda comes out, she is discovered wearing one of her very old dresses. And this dress she first wore as a young girl. So probably 30, 35, 40 years have passed between the time when she first wore that frock and now. And she's not at all concerned with what is fashionable and what is not, and she just says that, you know, since I have to dress up, I thought I would take something out of my trunk. Instead of spending money on myself, I have spent it on my daughter. Now, just putting on that dress takes Amanda into the past, and she imagines that she's a young girl still, and so she moves around the room, and she says, you know, this is how I sashayed around the ballroom, and she starts doing a few dance steps. Now, Laura has not seen this side of the mother. She's heard plenty of stories of how her mother used to entertain the young men in her own day, but she's never seen it. So she's a little confused when Mrs. Wingfield starts off on a kind of a history of the dress, and she says, I wore it on Sundays for my gentlemen callers. So this was her Sunday best dress, and she has taken it out after years to wear it for this afternoon when Jim O'Connor is going to come over for dinner. So she talks about the past. She tries to impress her own daughter with how pretty she was and how much the young men wanted to marry her, and how she went and married Mr. Wingfield, who turned out to be not good at all. So she was the kind of person who would dance the week away, and even when she was ill and she was advised to stay in bed, she'd say, oh no, I want to dance and I can't miss this party. So she was a party animal, and that's what is brought back to her mind when she puts on this yellow frock. So she is full of the stories of her past, and she doesn't realize even once that she is putting Laura in a very, very confusing situation, because Laura hears her mother talking like a young girl. Laura is young, and yet she talks like an old woman, whereas Mrs. Wingfield is slightly coquettish and she's reminded of the time in the past before she got married, and so she goes back to the past. She relives that entire episode in her life, and she's excited. So this is somewhat like vicarious delight. It's actually supposed to be Laura's day, but you find out that Amanda Wingfield sort of overpowers Laura's position, and she becomes the center of attraction, where Laura was supposed to be the center of attraction so that Mr. O'Connor could be attracted to her. All the attention, all the focus is diverted from her person and is shifted on to Mrs. Wingfield. So when we come back to the action of the play, Mrs. Wingfield says, "I gave your brother a little extra change so that he and Mr. O'Connor could take the service car and not have to ride on the bus or on the tram." Now, when Amanda talks about Mr. O'Connor, Laura's ears stick out like antennae, and she says, "What did you say the last name was?" And Amanda says, "O'Connor." And he says, "What is the first name?" And Amanda says, "Oh, I don't remember that." And then she gets this brainwave and she says, "Oh yes, I remember now. His name is Jim." Now the moment that she utters the name, the first name, Laura sways a little. She almost faints, and she has to hold on to the back of a chair. And the legend on the screen is "not Jim." Now, of course, for Laura, this comes as a shock. And she says, "Are you sure it is Jim O'Connor?" And Amanda says, "Yes, I asked Tom, and he said that his last name was O'Connor and that his first name was James." Now, this brings in confusion for Laura, and Laura says there was a Jim O'Connor at high school, but maybe this is a different person. And so she gets very nervous. She gets very, very tense. And when Laura asks Amanda how Tom got to know of Jim O'Connor, Amanda says, "Well, he met him at the warehouse. They're both working there." And Laura says that the Jim O'Connor in high school could not be this Jim O'Connor, and if it is, I will not come to the table. She's very tense and very nervous, and Amanda says, "What sort of nonsense is this? Remember, she has made a lot of preparation. She spent a lot of money in order to prepare the house and in order to buy this new dress for Laura. So now she's not going to have her plans changed." But Laura says, "You'll have to excuse me. I will not come to the table." And the reason she gives is, once in the past, Mrs. Wingfield had asked whether she liked any boy in school. And Laura says, "You remember that question? And I told you that there was one boy, and I showed you his picture in the yearbook." And Amanda says, "Oh, so that was the boy." And then she says, "Are you in love with that boy?" Laura says, "I don't know, Mother. All I know is I couldn't sit at the table if it was him," because it brings back a whole host of memories. It brings back her strong feelings for Jim O'Connor. But according to her, Jim O'Connor may not recognize her because she was an ordinary person. She was a cripple then. Whereas he was the high school star, the high school hero, and he was captain of the basketball team, and he was in the glee club, he was a singer. He was in the center of the high school setup, whereas she was someone on the very periphery. She was a totally unimportant creature. And Amanda says that you cannot be absent from the table. I will not have it. So just sit down and compose yourself till they come. Tom has forgotten his key, so you'll have to let them in when they arrive. So she delivers her ultimatum and she says that I'm not going to hear any more silliness on your part. Mr. O'Connor is coming for dinner. I want you to be very civil to him. And I don't want any of this so-called parda stuff that Laura says she is going to do, because she says, I'm not going to go in front of him. But Amanda says, nothing doing, you have to. And it is during this time that the doorbell rings. And Laura says, Mother, you go and answer the door. I cannot answer the door. She is scared stiff. And Amanda is, of course, her mother, and so she is also obstinate, and she says, you go and answer the door, I'm going to the kitchen. So she leaves Laura no choice but to answer the door. Laura is terrified. She cannot move, she can't say anything to anyone, but she has to do this. So she utters a low moan, she goes to the door, and she doesn't want to open it. She knows she has to, but she doesn't want to open it. Meanwhile, you see Jim and Tom appearing on the fire escape, and you know that this fire escape is the entrance into the apartment. When they approach, they ring the bell, and Laura rises panic-stricken. She doesn't know what to do, so she goes and hides behind the curtains. The doorbell rings again, and Laura is terrified. So Amanda calls out and she says, Laura, sweetheart, the door. And Laura just stares at the door and she will not move. So Jim, and here is where you have the conversation taking place between Tom and Jim. Jim says, well, you know, we just beat the rain. And Tom says, yes, maybe. Now, during this time, you see Jim and Tom on the fire escape, wanting to come into the house, but they've been locked out because, if you remember, Tom had lost his door key the previous night. So now they have to be let into the house. He can't just unlock and barge in. So at this point in time, you see that you have two parties. You have Laura, who has retreated behind the curtains, and you have Tom Wingfield, and you also have Jim O'Connor, who are standing there waiting for the door to open. So Amanda calls out and says, Laura dear, won't you open the door? So she's being very polite because she knows that she might be heard by the two people who are on the stage. So, and here the stage is the fire escape. So there's two people on the fire escape, and then there is Laura trying to hide behind the curtains. And then there's the voice of Mrs. Wingfield, in which she keeps on urging Laura to go and open the door. Now when Amanda does not hear anyone enter, she comes out of the kitchenette, she sees Laura petrified, and she says, what is the matter with you, you silly thing? And Laura says, please, you answer it. I can't answer the door. I cannot go and face him. And Amanda says, I told you I wasn't going to humor you, Laura. Why have you chosen this moment to lose your mind? And Laura says, please, 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 you go. And Amanda says, no, you will have to go to the door. You will have to open it. And Laura says, I can't do it. So there is this very whispering argument going on between the mother and daughter, because the apartment is a small one, and if they were to speak in their normal voices, chances are that Jim and Tom would hear them. So she says, I can't go. I cannot open the door. And Amanda keeps on saying, you have to do it. And Laura says, I'm sick. I cannot open the door because I'm sick. I'll tell everyone that I'm not feeling well. And Amanda says, I'm sick too of your nonsense. So she's very, very angry. And she says, you go and open the door. And by this time, Tom gives a loud ring, you know, because nobody's opened the door. So he rings the doorbell again. And finally, Laura has to go and open the door. She tries to avoid doing that, but Amanda will not let her do it. So she commands her and she says, you go and you open the door now. You will not make any excuses. So when Laura finally has to do it, Tom and Jim enter the apartment, and Tom makes the appropriate introductions. And Jim says, I didn't know that Shakespeare had a sister. Now, the reference to the Shakespeare is because Tom in the warehouse is known to be always writing poems and reading poems. So they've nicknamed him Shakespeare. And when Jim O'Connor sees Laura, he is totally amazed, and he says, I didn't know you had a sister. And of course, Laura is terribly, terribly nervous, whereas Jim does not recognize her, does not have any feelings, any emotions at all. And so he says, how do you do? Which is not a greeting that he would ordinarily have used for Laura, because he's not meeting her for the first time. It's just that he is meeting Laura after a very long gap, during which Laura has had her own life and Jim O'Connor has gone on to have a totally different life. So there's music in the background, and there's Laura who is petrified, and then there's Jim and Tom who entered. And of course Laura makes an excuse and she says, I haven't finished playing the Victrola. And she goes and she disappears from the scene. So Jim, seeing that Laura is very tense and very nervous, asks Tom, what is the matter? And Tom says, with Laura? Oh, Laura is terribly shy. Shy, huh? And the thing is that for somebody in Jim's position, or for that matter, somebody in Tom's position also, it's a very unusual thing to meet a shy girl. Now here is where you have cultural differences coming in. The culture that Tennessee Williams is writing about, shyness is not a positive feature, even in a girl, whereas in the Eastern tradition, a girl is expected to be shy, particularly before she gets married. So they discuss this, and then they're having this conversation with each other. Since they work together, they have a lot of things in common, and so they discuss sports, they discuss matters of mutual interest, and in this conversation they also discuss the course in public speaking that Jim O'Connor is doing in night school, and he tries to interest Tom in the same course. And Tom says, you know, what is the good of public speaking? And Jim says, it fits you for executive positions so that you don't have to go on working in the position of a clerk all your life. You can rise above, but you can't do that unless you have the power of public speaking, unless you have the power of persuading your listeners that you are in a position to accept responsibility. So they have this conversation in which Jim tries to talk to Tom Wingfield, and he tries to impress him with this course that he's taking. And one of the points that he brings out is that there is really no difference between him and another person, and the only reason that the other person would get an executive position is because he knows how to talk. He has mastered the art of public speaking. And Jim says that there's only one thing that differentiates me from others, and that is social poise, being able to square up to people and hold your own on any social level. So he's like repeating whatever he has been taught by the instructors in his night school. And one of the things that he has been taught is that you have to have confidence in your own abilities. You have to be able to hold your own in a conversation, and that is the only difference between the clerks and the executives. While they're having this conversation, Amanda calls out to Tom, and she says, you know, you make yourself comfortable, and I'll be coming in a short while. And when Tom says, okay, I'll do that, she says, maybe Mr. O'Connor would like to wash his hands. And Jim says, oh no, thank you. You know, I took care of that at the warehouse. Now this is where you see the difference between Mrs. Wingfield and Jim O'Connor. Mrs. Wingfield is the kind of person who would wash before every meal and who would make sure that her children washed before every meal. But Jim O'Connor says, oh, I already washed at the warehouse. My hands are clean. I don't need to wash them again. So they have this conversation about people that they know mutually, and there's one person who appears to be their boss, and that is Mr. Mendoza. And Jim says that you need to be very careful because you're spending a lot of time doing stuff that is on company time, and that and in which you are not really contributing to work at the company. And he sort of warns Tom that if you are not careful, you might get thrown out. And Tom says, I'm planning to change. In any case, I don't plan to stick around in the warehouse all my life. And he describes to Jim what he intends to do. And he says, I'm right at the point of committing myself to a future that doesn't include the warehouse and Mr. Mendoza, or even a night school course in public speaking. So he sort of lets the cat out of the bag by saying that I don't care if Mr. Mendoza is not happy with me. I'm at the point where I am finalizing my plans to leave this job, to leave Mr. Mendoza, and to go and serve on board a ship. You know, this is the kind of conversation that they're having. And then from this, they go on to discussing movies, and Tom says, I'm tired of seeing movies. I'm tired of seeing other people having adventures. I want to have adventures. I want to be able to say that I have sailed to the farthest ends of the globe, and I have visited different countries. I don't want to hear people talking about them, which is what he's been seeing in all the movies. So he says, I want to go beyond America. I want to go to a place where I can have adventure, where I can live a life. This is not life as I want to live it. And I'm going to do it. I am going to commit myself. I am just in the process of doing so. And so he sort of confesses to Jim that he has planned to move. He's not planning to stay here in this job anymore. He is going to make a clean break and he's going to go. And Jim says, when are you going? And Tom says, soon. And of course Jim wants to know where. And this is where we sort of end this class and this part of the play. The theme of the music seems to answer Jim's question of where. Tom ponders the question, Tom thinks it over, but the music is such that, you know, Jim sort of is content that he has received the answer to his question. We're going to stop here, but before I say Allah Hafiz for today, I'm going to quickly go over what we have covered. We are at a very sort of crucial point of the play, which in this class we started off at a point where Tom tells his mother that he has invited one of his colleagues from work to school. Amanda, of course, gets very excited and she starts making preparations in her mind, and she says, you know, it's a good thing I have the new sofa and I need to put up new curtains, and I need to bring out my wedding silver or the cutlery and the crockery that I have kept all these years, and we must have the floor lamp in which I was paying installments. So very quickly, you know, she starts making up her plans, and Tom tries to tell her not to get too excited, not to start making plans, because he's just bringing his colleague over for dinner. He has not told him that he has a sister. He's not told him anything about his personal life. And here Amanda is making plans, and she's asking details about his nature and his temperament. And she says, does he drink? What is his full name? How much money is he making? All these questions she asks because she's already cast him in the role of Laura's husband. So she wants to know everything about Mr. O'Connor, and Tom gets tired of her incessant questions, and he says that you know, you shouldn't take this very seriously. He doesn't even know that I have a sister. All that I've told him is that I want him to come to dinner tomorrow, and so he took up that invitation. But Mrs. Wingfield is very, very serious, and he says, you know, you people don't think about these things, but this is what I keep on thinking about. And you smoke too much, you go out every night, and if you want to become a sailor, you want to go into the merchant marines, you're most welcome to do it. But the only condition that I have is that you have to make sure that your sister is happily married, settled, before you go off. I don't care about myself, but you have to be careful about your sister. You have to make sure that there are proper arrangements made, and it's only then that you can go. Once your sister is settled finally, I will not interfere with any plans of yours, and I'll allow you to go, but you must see to it that she's settled first. So Tom gets a little tired of this harangue, you know, or this constant complaints and bickering, and he says, okay, we'll see what happens. So when the next evening approaches towards 5 o'clock, Mrs. Wingfield is trying to get Laura fitted into a new dress, and Laura is getting very tense. She's nervous. She's already very sensitive creature. So she says, Mother, you're making me nervous. And Amanda says, just relax, you know, there's nothing to be tense about. Mr. O'Connor will be coming any moment. And when she hears the last name or the surname, Laura's antennae prick up, and she says, Mr. O'Connor, what's his first name? And that's when she realizes that this Jim O'Connor might be the same Jim O'Connor that she was in love with and that she admired and that she hero worshipped. So when she gets this idea, she gets even more tense, she gets even more nervous. And so within a short time, when the bell rings and Amanda says, you go and answer the doorbell, Laura says, I will not do it. She becomes so nervous that she says, you know, I feel sick, I feel nauseous, I feel like throwing up. But Amanda pressures her into answering the door. So Laura goes there, opens the door, says, how do you do to Jim O'Connor, and then she disappears saying that I have not finished playing the Victrola. Now when she leaves, Amanda is still in the kitchen, and we find Jim and Tom discussing their work situation, discussing people that they know, and that is when Jim sort of lets on to Tom that his professional reputation or his professional reputation is suffering at the workplace, and if he doesn't watch out, he will be kicked out very soon. So then Tom sort of confesses, he confides in Jim O'Connor that he will not be staying long at the warehouse. That's not what he has in mind for himself. He has a career that is totally removed from this place and these people. And that is the point where we ended, where Jim throws out the question of where Tom is planning to go, and Tom does not answer that. He's just sort of pondering the question, and that's the place, that's the point at which we are going to end today. So thank you very much, and we will be completing this play in the next couple of classes. Thank you, and Allah Hafiz.